Let's take this show on the road. Same-ish, different day. I'll be bored out my mind. Hometown, love my place, but while
Hi friends, let's dye some yarn. So apparently I forgot to turn on the microphone for the first clip of this video, so I will be doing a voiceover instead. Today we're going to dye a favorite color of mine, and actually the colorway that got me started with yarn dyeing in the first place, or actually my version of it. I once bought a couple of skeins of this gorgeous autumn colored hand-dyed yarn, and it was way too expensive for me to get as much as I want. I wanted to get all the skeins. So I decided that I would learn how to dye myself. So here I have prepared 4 skeins of fingering weight superwash merino. And I have my big tub for soaking. I have added 6 liters of water into it, and I'm going to add about half a tablespoon of citric acid for soaking. I usually do a little bit ahead of in the soaking water, and then I add a little bit more when I'm doing the actual dyeing. There we go. And next we are going to put the skeins in the soaking tub to soak, because they need to be properly soaked in order for the dye to adhere to the yarn properly. So I'm gathering them all up. I've added a zip tie to each of the skeins to prevent them from tangling too much while soaking and dyeing. And I'm just pushing them gently into the water to make sure everything gets soaked properly. And then we're going to let it sit for at least half an hour to soak before we start dyeing. So that's coming up next, as well as the original audio. Enjoy! Now the yarn has been soaking for a little over half an hour, almost an hour, and we are ready to start dyeing. So what we're going to do, first of all, we're going to be using one of these canteens to dye in. I will link below the size of this so you know. And this one holds 4 skeins comfortably. So you're going to start to add water into that. Let's see. There we go. Now I'm using metric measurements. So this is 2 liters. And I'm going to add 1 more. And 1 more. And we are also going to add some more citric acid. Yeah. I'm going to add about a tablespoon. This will dissolve as soon as the water heats up. We'll set that aside. Now, I will grab, I usually just do 1 skein at a time. Just push some of the water out. And I will place it in the canteen. So, the next one. Just putting them next to each other. Let's see. And the last one. And there we go. All 4 skeins placed in the canteen, distributed evenly, and we're ready to start dyeing. So, what do we need to dye? Well, we need pair of gloves, something to protect your airways from the dyes. I use these old yogurt containers to just put water in so that I can put my spoons in it when I'm working. And these spoons are only for yarn dyeing. Do not use tools that you're using to cook for yarn dyeing. It has to be separate. So these are only for yarn dyeing. And these are the colors we'll be using. Well, let's start with this one. I'm using Jacquard acid dyes for this color. I call this Autumn Leaves. And it's sun yellow. It is burnt orange. And it is Kelly green. So let's get started. Okay, let's start adding some dye. Protection first for your mouth and nose, and this is absolutely adequate for this type of work. You do not need, I've seen people use like full-on gas masks, and you do not need that. This is absolutely enough. So I hope you'll be able to hear me even though I am wearing a mask. And I'm choosing not to use the gloves right now. And here's the yellow dye. And a little goes a long way. So we'll just sprinkle a little here and there for starters. A little bit more. And we will be adding a bit more here and there as we're working. So, and we will turn on the stove. Now, since I have this type of stove, I live in Sweden, so this is what we have. You can also, of course, have induction plates, but I live in a really old house, so this is what we got. So I turn on both of these two, and I will be turning around the canteen in order to make sure everything gets warmed up. So we start off with the yellow while heating up the oven. Oh, I should also mention that the tray I'm using here to keep everything on, I cover that in plastic wrap and then some paper just to catch any speckles of color that may fly around. And I'm just pushing the yellow down a bit, like so, while we're waiting for the water to start heating. And making sure the powder dissolves properly. And I'm going to go ahead and add the burnt orange as well. Now this is a darker color, so this will spread a lot. The more saturated a color is, the more it will take over, so use sparingly. And if you're dyeing for yourself and not for commercial purposes, you do not need these large cans. It's more than enough to have the small ones, the 14 grams ones, because they will last you a long time. You can dye a lot like that. In the beginning, I only bought the small ones because that was all I needed. So that is not going to break the bank for you. Like so. Let's see where we end up with that. And let's push that in a bit as well. Dyeing yarn is not, or hand dyeing yarn is not an exact science, which is why it's so difficult to get the exact same results each time. And that is as it should be, I think. You're making artisan yarns. But you can make them similar. And as you can see, I did not use specific measurements for this. I'm just dabbing on the dye. And it's starting to heat up here. I don't know if you can tell. There's smoke coming up. Now you do not need to boil this at all. It just needs to be hot. I'm going to be moving the canteen around a bit because you need to make sure all the water gets heated. If you don't, there will be colder spots where the dye doesn't adhere to the yarn. Just poke it here and there. Make sure you get dye everywhere. Gently moving it about. Now this is a superwash yarn, which means it is not as sensitive as a pure wool. So it's, if it does boil, it's not a big deal. It's not going to get ruined. It doesn't felt. Okay, things are starting to happen here. Starting to heat up. As you can see, I'm shifting it about to make sure it gets hot everywhere. And now it's starting to boil here. So I'm turning the heat down. Like I said, it does not need to boil, it just needs to be hot. I'm going to switch plates, burners, and I'm going to use these two in the front. And since this is metal, it can absolutely take being heated up on a stove like this. That's no problem. Okay, let's go in with a bit of Kelly green. This one actually looks more yellow than green, but it is green. You'll see in a second here. I'm just speckling this ever so slightly here and there. This is also quite a powerful color, so you do not need a lot. But it doesn't need to be perfect. Like so. As you can see, it's quite a strong color. And I'm just going to let that sit a little before I start dabbing it with a spoon. Starting to get a bit of an autumn vibe, don't you think? We're getting there. And I keep moving this around to make sure it heats up everywhere. By gently moving the yarn around, you also help the hot water spread throughout the pan. Because when you're dyeing on an oven like mine, it does tend to get, especially in the middle, it takes a little while longer to get warm. Now you might be wondering why I haven't used my gloves yet. I am going to show you why, or actually I haven't needed them until now. Now I'm going to do something that I don't necessarily recommend. I'm going to use my hands to check the temperature. So I just poke it, and this is cold here in the middle, like I said. Starting to warm up the ends. It back. So. We'll just poke it a little again while it's heating up. To make sure the water spreads all around properly. You can see there's a lot of dye in the water still. And we are also not done adding dye yet. This particular yarn is a bit of a process to dye, which means I will be, in a bit here, I'm going to flip the yarn and we'll be adding more dye to the other side. I have a really old stove, so it doesn't heat very fast, sadly. Okay, things are really starting to heat up here. I'm going to make another check. I don't know if you can see, but it's steaming. It's getting hot. Okay. Okay, really hot up there. Yeah. Now we're going to do something really interesting. We are actually going to flip the yarn. Now, since I have a very limited amount of space here, I'm going to lift it to the side so I can move a bit more. Now, this is very hot, so you need to be very careful not to burn yourself. Now, just lift it up and flip it so that I get the other side facing up. As you can see, there are parts that are lighter on this side, and try to spread it evenly. The third one, and the final color. You can see here as well are patches that are lighter. So we're going to add in some more color on this side. We're starting to get an autumny feel. We'll put it back on the stove. Okay, let's add in some more dye. I'm actually going to have some yellow. I'll just sprinkle it here and there. Since yellow is a very light color, it's not going to be as much yellow as it is going to just brighten certain patches. Let's put that in there. Now I'm going to do a wee bit of orange. Let's see, it's that one. Again, the orange is very powerful, so use gently. I think that's enough. I'm just gonna let that sit for a little bit. Start it a little. And let's add a little bit more green. Just a touch here and there. And now we're just going to keep the canteen hot, keep all the water hot. And once it has exhausted completely, we can set it aside to cool. Up the greens a little, make them blend. You can see here the water is green. And we added more. And here it's orange, so it hasn't exhausted yet. What we're looking for is the water to be clear again. It won't always happen if you dye with colors that are very powerful. Sometimes you won't be able to exhaust it completely, and that's fine. As long as the yarn has grabbed as much dye as it needs. But as a general rule, we are looking for the dye to exhaust completely. Now also poking each end where it's a curve, because everywhere the yarn is pressed onto itself, it will have a harder time to get the dye all the way into all the strands of yarn. So I make sure to poke them a little bit extra to make sure they're dyed as well. I don't mind if they're lighter, I just don't want any white patches. It's actually quite meditative to dye yarn like this. And you don't have to rush it. And again, I keep moving the canteen around a bit, just to make sure it's hot everywhere. And you can absolutely dye yarn in your own kitchen. Just make sure to clean the area where you're working and make sure there's no food items around and no tools that are used for food, making food. It's just absolutely fine. And just wear a mask when you're working with the dye pots, because it's a very, very fine powder and you don't want to get that into your lungs. making sure there's dye everywhere in between. That's why I'm poking the yarn a bit. And also making sure it's hot everywhere. Because if it doesn't get hot, it does not, the dye doesn't add to attach to the yarn. Actually, I think I want a little bit more orange in this one. I'm feeling a deeper autumnal vibe. Well, let's add a little bit more. And you can just keep adding all the way up until you take it off the stove. It's absolutely fine. You can do a little Bob Ross thing here with your dyes. And just go with it. You see the water is starting to get clearer. It's not entirely clear yet. We're getting there. It's sort of a light yellow, lighter green down here in the corner. But it has pretty much exhausted. Not too much left now. And when it has exhausted this much, you can see here, there's not a lot of dye left. And it will continue to exhaust as long as the water is warm, which it will be for quite a while more. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this from the stove now and set it to cool before I rinse it. And it needs to cool completely. It has to be absolutely cold before you start rinsing it. Otherwise you will shock the yarn. So let's turn off the stove and move it aside. Okay. Setting the yarn aside to cool off. And like I said, make sure not to rinse it until it has cooled completely. So we'll get back to it once it's cool. The yarn has cooled off completely now. The water is all cold and it's time to rinse. I use a plastic bowl. You don't really have to use, you can rinse it directly in the sink, but I like using this one. So I'm just going to add, make sure the water is cold, there we go. Cold water. And I like using soak when rinsing my yarns. Don't have to have that either, but you could use just if you use for your dishes, or you can use some shampoo. But I like this, I like the scents. I also carry this in my web shop, the smaller bottles, if you're interested. I will link those below. So I'll add a little bit of that. Let me get that one out of the way. And you rinse in cold water. You do not want hot water for this because this water is cold, so you want this to be cold. Let's see. I think that's enough. Okay, and we're just going to pick them out of the pan, like so. As you can see, the water in the pan is completely clear. We're just going to squeeze out some of the water in here. And we'll put it over here. Now, something to think about when you use the zip ties is that dye may sometimes catch on the zip tie and stay there, so make sure you rinse that one properly as well. And the second skein. Now you can see it's a lovely autumn color. And we got some speckles as well. Really nice. I'm very pleased with this. And the last one. And the water is completely clear. That's what we're looking for. We want when we want the dye to exhaust. So I'm just going to pour that out. And we'll set that aside for cleaning before the next one. And I've got a plastic bowl here to just catch the skeins as I've rinsed them and pop them out of the rinsing bath. Let's see. I'm going to move it a little bit like this. There we go. I'm just going to squeeze out the water. There we go. You don't need to process it a lot when rinsing. And the next one. And make sure to dunk the zip tie as well. So there's no dye remaining on it. There we go. And I don't twist it, I just squeeze the water out. Next one. And the last one. And you can see the water has a slight taint of yellow now, which means there was some remaining speckles of dye, probably on the zip ties. There we go. Now when you're rinsing your yarn using soak, you really don't have to rinse it again. You can just do it once, but I prefer to do it twice, just to make sure I get out any, or as much as possible of any dye residue. So I'm going to do one more with just water. And cold water again, of course. A little bit more, I think. Something like that. And we'll just tuck them back in. There we go. Just poke them a little. And there we go. Squeeze up the water. Double it. Squeeze it again. Proper chokehold. Pour yarn. And the second one. And squeeze up water. Next one. Same thing again. This one is a little bit tangled. If you just move the zip tie around a bit and you just keep dunking it in the water, it tends to dissolve a lot on its own. We got some loops here, but we'll shake them out as it dries. There we go. And the last one. This is the easiest way to detangle yarn. It's actually to do this. Squeezing out the water. And again. And there we go. That's it. We're just going to pour out this water. And we're going to hang this to dry. I just hang these on a regular clothing rack. And it usually takes a couple of days to dry, depending on how hot it is. I live in Sweden currently, so wintertime it usually takes several days. Spring and summer, a couple of days. And when I hang them to dry, after it's been drying for about 24 hours, I will move the zip tie so that you don't have the same bend all the time, because it gets very thick here, so it takes a long time to dry. So if you move the zip tie to a different position and you just shake the yarn a little, spread it out a bit when you hang it to dry, it will dry very quickly. So that's it. Here is the finished result of the yarn. It's all dry and skeined up, or hanged up really. I'm very pleased with how this came out. And like I showed you, it's not too difficult to make yourself, so go ahead and tag me if you do make this colorway. I would love to see what you make.